So, hi everybody, and welcome to the conclusion, or perhaps a better word would be summation, of this little mini series about money. And since I mentioned in the introduction that I'm a filmmaker, you may wonder, why would I even be interested in a topic like this, aside from having as much money as possible to make a movie? And it goes back to my days as a PhD candidate. And part of what I was interested in was the notion of value and trying to determine if there was some way of talking about value in the image that did not fall back on economic definitions. And I mentioned this to an economist friend of mine, and I said, within economics, is there any other definition of value besides price? And he said, no, basically that in economics, value is seen as price. Now, that is interesting for a couple of reasons, and I want to talk about initially a similarity between capitalism and Marxism, which is not often credited. And that is that both of them are economic theories. Marxism goes in a different direction, but the point being that both of them see money and currency as fundamental to meaning, if you will. They derive different conclusions from this, however, of course, because capitalism is based on the notion of informed self-interest. That is to say that the capitalist and the entrepreneur, in creating wealth for themselves, do so in a way that also creates value for society in general. Marxists, on the other hand, would insist that that is just the first step, and that because capitalism is egotistic, that's to say based on individual selfishness, that it should be transcended into the socialist mentality of the group good. Now, I'm not here to make an argument one way or the other, but what I do find interesting is how these two otherwise very different approaches to sociology and psychology and economics share this fundamental interest in money as the determining factor in society. Now, you might think, of course, a Marxist would answer that with saying that of course, is a reflection of bourgeois ideology, in the sense that because capitalism trains us to think in terms of profit and loss and individual gratification, that altruistic motivation is overlooked. And again, I'm not getting into whether that's right or wrong. The point being, however, that what Marxists could point to is that the overriding idea of money as the determining notion of value is a definitely historically and socially determined. For example, you need look no further than the medieval church, in which, yes, wealth obviously existed, but it was always seen as at most the reward for the Christian life. Now, rhetoric by Christian fundamentalists to the contrary notwithstanding, I don't think anyone would really insist that that is true of life, or at least of contemporary life. In fact, the action of Christian hypocrites often is the best testament against this. But rather than fall back on the Christian alternative, which is based on simply another form of faith, is there any alternative to the notion of value as determined by money? Now, one obvious possible explanation would be science. The problem with that, though, is that unlike money, where I don't need to convince you that you're always looking for the best buy for your money, in science, the fact that something is objectively correct, though it often is enough to make people behave in a particular way, it often is insufficient. Moreover, to rely on science as a faith is in fact running counter to the very idea of science, which is based on the notion of disproving something as true. In other words, science establishes the best possible explanation for a phenomenon as we know it, but is constantly seeking to know more to determine whether or not that is true. And as soon as there is contrary evidence that disproves it, then that ceases to be a way of measuring value. So science is a partial replacement, but if given the choice between something that will satisfy their financial reward versus something that is objectively true, they're going to go for what makes them a little bit wealthier or a little bit happier. So what is the alternative? Well, I wish I could say I had an answer, but I don't, because frankly, even if science were to replace economics as the measure of value, I wouldn't personally want to be in a world like that where everything has to be objectively true. And yet, subjectivity too often, and certainly today, is used as a means of manipulation, of using the emotions not for long-term satisfaction, but for momentary satisfaction. So where does that leave us? Well, I would say it leaves us in the consumerist hall of mirrors in which we're trying to find our way through to something like some kind of truth and happiness, but always with the recognition that it's going to be partial. And I think perhaps the most intelligent way to approach this question is to think, yes, I live in a consumer society. Yes, everything is measured in terms of money, but I can at least take the step of trying to evaluate a purchase based more on utility, long-term utility versus immediate gratification. They aren't necessarily contradictory, but by using that as a way of balancing your determination, that helps to move us a little bit closer towards some degree of happiness. It's still materialistic, it's still egotistical, but at least it's based on the notion that there's more to the moment, more than just immediate gratification. And on that somewhat preaching note, thank you for listening to all of this, and please leave a comment and get in touch with me somehow, and we can carry on the conversation elsewhere. I don't want to take this any further, though, because you could go on and on. After all, there is an entire field called economics. But anyway, talk to you later.